Okay, we should be live everywhere now. So, hello everyone. I am HP Holo. I write books and I also chat with other authors who write books. And today I have Robert
E.
Hampson
Yes.
on to talk about his latest book, The Moon and the Desert. So, Rob, if you will introduce yourself, tell us who you are, what you wrote, where we can find your stuff, and then we will get into talking about the book that has been consuming my afternoon. So, all right.
Thanks, HP. I'm Robert E. Hampson. Rob Hampson, to most of the folks that know me. Some folks even have been known to call me Speaker, which is short for Speaker to Lab Animals, because I am a laboratory research scientist, also clinical research scientist in the neurosciences. I study the brain, figure out whether we have one or not, which is always a challenge to figure out. Yes, but I also write military science fiction. I have a number of short stories out in collections with the Chris Kennedy Publishing Group and Bain Books, quite a few short stories. You'll see some of my titles behind me. Also, I have a series of novels that I co-authored with Sandra Medlock and a few others in the Chris Kennedy Publishing's Four Horsemen universe. And those are the Rogel novels in which we deal with intelligent octopus. So I have a few of those around as
I need to
well.
point out
And
my little
yes,
rule.
there's her Rogel. She's got it right there. Plus a couple of anthologies that I co-edited for Bain, The Founder Effect and Stellaris, People of the Stars. Again, you can see a little bit of that behind me in my display. But so you can find me online, find me at rehampson.com, or I've got a nonfiction article up at Bain right now that talks about the science behind the moon and the desert. And of course, I love to give interviews. I'll be at some conventions, Fantasy convention next weekend. Also, LibertyCon, Congregate, which is here in Winston-Salem, North Carolina in July, DragonCon, and hope to see folks at a number of those different locations. Let me know if you want to hear from me. I'm probably going to go out about and do a little bit of a few signings around North Carolina and around South Texas as well.
Nice. All right. So we are here today to talk about The Moon and the Desert, which came out last week. Was it last week or this week?
Last week.
Last week. All right. And so I'm just going to start by having you tell us a little bit about that one. And I also want to say to viewers, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments, and I will field them, and we will get some interesting answers. So let's hear about Moon in the Desert, though.
I don't know. We'll get answers, whether they're interesting or not. So, there's a TV show called The $6 Million Man. And that is actually showing my age to be talking about this TV show, because it was very popular about 50 years ago, which is back in the dark ages. We banged rocks together to make the sparks it used to broadcast television back in those days. It was actually based on a science fiction book by Martin Caidin, and that was called Cyborg. And if you're a Star Trek fan that's heard of the Borg, yeah, it's the same idea. Cyborg would be individuals, people, humans who have cybernetic or mechanical or bioelectronic parts. And so in the story Cyborg, in the TV show The $6 Million Man, the main character was it was Steve Austin, who was an astronaut who was very badly injured in a crash, and he lost his legs, he lost an arm, and he lost an eye. And the tagline for the TV series was, "We can rebuild him. We have the technology." And so what they did is they gave him these advanced biomechanical legs, arm, and in the TV series, he had an eye that could see in the infrared. It could be a camera. He could use it for range finding and all sorts of things like that. And the funny part of it was, at the time the TV series came out, none of this was possible. But over the last 50 years, the bionics field, the neuroprosthetics field, has advanced to the point where a lot of the active prosthetics, the ability to have the brain controlling an artificial arm and flex the fingers, be able to grab things and be able to do what's necessary, all of that has come about and is possible over the last 50 years. So I thought, um, well, I know a lot of the people that have been working on it. Why not write the story again and update it for the present day?
Yes, and it's a super cool story thus far. I'll say to the audience, I actually asked Rob to describe the show in detail because I was making my notes for this show tonight and realized that in my youth, I had been calling the show the wrong name, the $1 billion man, the whole week because it was not a show that I grew up with. It aired before I was even born. And so, talking about generational differences, I also, every time I read someone say Steve Austin was in it, I was picturing Stone Cold Steve Austin. And so, I was picturing a very different show than actually aired. But thank you for the description. And just for the audience, if I say the $1 billion man, I actually mean $6 million.
We'll know who you mean.
But, oh, hey, Martin. Martin says, hey, we're not old, we're experienced. All right. So, one interesting thing about your career in general is that the show, The $6 Million Man, actually had effects on your career more so than just inspiring you to write this novel. And because I was going through your author bios and looking at all the neat stuff. But my first question, if you actually, do you want to do the reading first, or do you want to get to?
No, I think these are good lead ups to it. So.
Okay, yeah. So I was curious, what was your personal path to seeing the science fiction depicted in The $6 Million Man? What path did you take to follow that to go into a career that would allow you to realize that science fiction? Because I mean, you've gone into all the careers necessary for it. How many PhDs do you have?
Just one.
Just one? Really? For some reason, I had it in my head that you had like 9. You're just that brilliant.
No, there's just 9 different fields within it.
Okay, there we go. There we go. That's where my mistake was happening. Anyway, you're brilliant enough to have 9. But yeah, I was curious to know, like, what'd you do to get to all those places and learn about all this technology?
Well, so I got to do this. I got to take us back and spin the Wayback Machine so we can go back to 1974. 1973. In fact, 50 years before the book was released on March 7th of 2023. On March 7th of 1973, the first TV movie, The $6 Million Man, aired. And at that time, this entire field of bionics didn't exist. It actually dates back to the late 50s and early 60s with some engineers working with the Air Force who were trying to figure out what's the best way to build machines and that would operate in space and to enable the astronauts to operate in space. And so they came up with these ideas. One of which was called bionic, which meant lifelike, and it was to try to take things like how flower petals unfold in the sun and use it for unfolding solar arrays on a satellite, and figure out different ways for an astronaut to exist and function in space. And there was at least one group that said, the only way they're going to do that is if we augment them with some extra mechanical and electronic capabilities, which is where the original cyborg concepts come from. So the concepts were there, but the reality of the science was not there. In the mid 1970s, prosthetic research meant making the right alloy for the pins and the plates that were used to put a really badly broken bone back together, or the very early science of hip replacements and knee replacements and the like. So the field didn't exist. The thing about it is, I didn't know that. I mean, I was a teen when $6 Million Man aired, and I was going to college. I started college in 1976 and went off to graduate school in 79. And I said, I'm going to study bionics. And I didn't realize field didn't exist. And so I found a lab that was doing prosthetics research, only to find that, as I said, it was all about um, the alloys that are being used for these uh, medical implants, so something that wouldn't react and wouldn't break down. And I kind of got a little disappointed and started doing some other research. I had the thought in my mind I wanted to go to medical school, and I was kind of smart that that's not what I did. But I went into graduate school, went into research, and became very fascinated. I was recruited because I was a little bit ahead of my time with computer science. I was recruited into a laboratory that was doing memory research because I needed somebody who could handle the computer work. And at the same time, I learned all of the science about it and figured out better ways to apply the computer work. And that got me fascinated with memory. And so I started studying memory and I stuck with memory and I really, really enjoyed it. It's been my career and I've been at it for 40 years now. But in 2019, I was part of a DARPA project that was studying memory. And DARPA had all of their scientists who were working on these prosthetics and neural implants and all of the brain stuff come together in one meeting. And at the meeting was a guy who had one of these um, bionic arms. This was a fellow who had lost his arm to cancer. And so the bone of the upper arm was fused with a titanium rod. And from that rod, they hung a fully articulated bionic arm. He can move his elbow, he can move his wrist, he can move his fingers. And I looked around at that time and I go, oh my goodness, the field of bionics is here. And these people in this room, they're the ones who created it. And yeah, I got to hang out in the periphery a little bit. So it was really quite neat. And so the $6 Million Man TV show had a lot to do with the research that I and the career that I followed.
That's one of the things I enjoy hearing about most from sci-fi authors. What fiction inspired them to either go into writing sci-fi or to realize the sci-fi they read about. And so it's just that overlap is just super cool to hear about. Let's see here. Do you think now's a good time to go into your reading?
Yeah, I think so.
All right.
I think
Well,
so.
let's set us up
All
and
right.
I will let you have at it.
Okay. So in the story, the main character is not Steve Austin. I didn't really feel that I could um, utilize all of that property. I've referred to it a few times without actually using any of the names or making any explicit references. It's but my character's name is Glenn Armstrong Shepard, and yes, that is a shout out to astronauts. In the story, Glenn was born in 1999 on the anniversary of the Apollo landing. And Glenn was a family name, and of course the surname was Shepard. And because he was born on the anniversary of the landing, his father decided he needed to have Armstrong as a middle name. After all, as it turned out, he had three astronaut names. So um, Glenn is a doctor. He's an astronaut by virtue of the fact that he's a flight surgeon and he's working for the Space Force. And he's an astronaut, and he's in training for a mission to Mars in around about 2040 is when this is supposed to take place. And they're on the moon testing some of their equipment that can't be tested on Earth because it's designed for Mars atmosphere and Mars gravity is too delicate for Earth. But some of the things that have to be done on the moon in order to simulate what they're going to do because they don't have any atmosphere to work with um, involves some very volatile fuels. And the Glenn is the doctor who's monitoring everything that's going on in the test, and the test vehicle crashes. And Glenn is not in it. This is a difference from $6 Million Man, but he sees that the pilot is trapped and he is in danger. And Glenn is the sort of person who runs toward danger. It's a problem for him, by the way, because what happens is he gets the pilot out, but he gets very badly burned and blown up in the process. And so Glenn's got a plan. He wanted to go to Mars, and he figures, well, hey, just because I've, badly broken all my legs, both of my legs, and lost an arm and an eye and an ear, they can just rebuild me. Because after all, we've got these nice bionics, prosthetics around. Build me back and send me back to Mars. Except it doesn't work that way. It's not fast. It's not efficient, and frankly, the bosses don't believe he's capable of doing this. And so a major portion of the story of the $6 Million Man is Glenn's fight to be accepted again, and for him to prove himself that he is capable of doing everything that he could have before his accident. He goes through a number of different things, one of which is he happens upon an overturned car during a tornado, and he rescues the people inside, a mother and two young kids. In the process, he kind of reveals to the world that he's there and got a lot of press attention. And the powers that be are a little upset with him. And so they send him off to training on the island of Hawaii, where he's going to be isolated for quite some time. They are consenting to let him back into the astronaut training, although they really aren't giving him permission to be an astronaut yet. But it involves him being at very high elevation on the big island of Hawaii. And he has a bright idea. Because one of the things that the Air Force and the Army have both come to understand is that your body undergoes a lot of changes when you're at elevation and there's less oxygen. You become much more efficient at using oxygen. And a lot of times, Olympic athletes will live at high elevations, like 8,000 or 9,000 feet, and then come down to sea level to test and train and compete. Glenn gets a great idea. Hey, I've just spent half a year living above 9,000 feet, and I'm on the big island of Hawaii. And they run this race here that's swimming and biking and running, and I'm going to test myself against it. And so we pick up, we're about a quarter of the way through the book, and some things are going to undergo a major change for Glenn about this point. But first, he's going to test himself. So I'll start the reading here. It was time to test himself. Nick, that's his doctor friend, would meet him in Kona and provide support for his private race. The record for the Ironman course had been nearly 8 hours, but for Extreme Iron, the new, longer, harder version, the record was just under 15 hours total time over 2 days. 100 minutes swimming, 7.5 hours cycling, and 6 hours running. He would have to complete 4 hours in the water and or 4 miles in the water. He was cycling over 150 miles, and he would run for 50 miles. Normally, it would take even an elite athlete so much energy that they had to split this across 2 days. But Glenn planned to do it all in one. Given his individual running and cycling speed ratings from last year, he felt he could cut the time in half. On the other hand, fatigue would also take a toll. So frankly, he'd be happy if he could manage to match the records of individuals who trained all their lives for the grueling course. He felt that if he could withstand the extreme iron, he could withstand the rigors of spaceflight and handle any test Space Force would throw at him. He would prove it to them. He was not just fully recovered, but faster, stronger, better than he had ever been before. He wanted to get command's attention, although he couldn't figure on attracting it here. Before assignment to the Hawaii training centers, Glenn had been told in no uncertain terms, keep your nose clean, keep your head down. Do not attract attention. Do not talk to the press. Do not get yourself into any trouble or any situation that would get you noticed. What he didn't count on was the trouble searching him out. The experiment started out okay, but not great, which didn't make Glenn very optimistic about challenging the performance of elite athletes. Nick had all of his gear in an SUV he'd checked out in the motor pool at the Puakaloa Training Center. The two had worked out all of the waypoints and brakes, and Nick could also monitor his vitals and location via Glenn's waterproof wristcom. Glenn started his 4-mile swim by entering the water from the small beach across from the Royal Kona Resort on Kailua Bay. On race day, there would be a crowd waiting out from the beach to the start buoys marking the beginning of deep water. There would also be course marking buoys and boats, but he didn't have those. Instead, his wristcom sent navigation waypoints directly to the electronics of his bionic ear, including prompts to tell him when he was off course. The outbound leg to the cruise ship anchorage was the hard part. Swimming back inshore to the turnaround point, opposite a distinctive blocky white hotel, was easier. Plus, he had his nav system. The data logger would track time and distance and sound in his ear so that he didn't have to worry about anything other than swimming. He was about 50 feet from the pier when his wristcom signaled completion of the desired distance. He swam to the base of the pier, then climbed out of the water to meet Nick. Unlike a standard triathlon in which athletes wore the same clothing for all phases, changing only their shoes, extreme iron phases were timed separately. Thus, athletes had time to change into comfortable and appropriate clothing for each phase. Glenn climbed into the back of the military utility vehicle and quickly changed clothes for the next phase. "What was your time?" Nick asked from the front seat. 2 hours, 23 minutes. Lousy time, Glenn grunted. Uh-huh. And how long has it been since you swam? I know there's no pools up on the mountain, Captain Dumbass. Yeah, you have a point, Nick. Okay, I'll see you in a few hours. I'll see you in a few minutes, Nick said. I'll be right behind you the whole way. Little did the two of them realize that someone else was watching and would also be right behind. Jennifer Butler was on vacation, one that had been forced on her by her editor and publisher. She was a journalist who had specialized in interviews and human interest stories, sometimes with an investigative edge. Her news outlet had been doing a special feature on community heroes, and she'd been assigned to write about a council leader responsible for reducing crime, increasing high school graduation rates, and bringing jobs to a depressed area of Richmond, Virginia. The profile was going great until she discovered that the subject of her story was maintaining 2 residences, complete with 2 wives and 2 sets of kids, and not enough income to account for all of his expenses. It turned out that he was receiving payoffs to underreport crimes and overreport the number of jobs. When she presented the story to her editor, she was told to keep it quiet until he could figure out how to handle the bombshell. To his credit, the editor pulled the profile from the special issue they'd been putting together and convinced the publisher to move the story of corruption and scandal to a high profile and publish as his own special report. The target of her story did not take the revelation well. He shouted his defiance even as he was being hauled off to jail. Soon after, Jen started receiving death threats, most likely from the criminals ultimately behind the corruption. Her publisher assured her that she still had a job as well as paid leave, but suggested she take a long vacation out of town, out of state, and off the US mainland. But as a journalist, Jen's curiosity was piqued when she noticed not one or possibly 2 blacked out SUVs repeatedly passing below her vantage point. She was overlooking the water sports rental area at the base of the Kailua Pier, sitting at one of the many pubs and restaurants with a second floor open air dining room that looked out onto Ali'i Drive along the Kona waterfront. She was engaged in her favorite pastime of people watching. The usual tourists in loose-fitting flower print Hawaiian shirts and blouses, hotel and restaurant employees in tailored, muted Hawaiian prints, and locals in shorts and various types of t-shirts. She saw, okay, sorry, lost my track. Her attention was caught by a man walking out of the water onto a small patch of sand at the base of the pier. He walked over to a tan-colored vehicle with military plates. He climbed into the back and emerged a few minutes later wearing cycling gear, took a bicycle out of the truck bed, and started to pedal north up the road. This man didn't look like either a tourist or a local. He looked familiar, and he walked funny when he first got out of the water. He reached down and placed his hands on each side of his right thigh and seemed to squeeze. It looked like a small squirt of water came out in response. Then he did the same with his left leg and seemed to walk more easily. Prosthetics? Would someone go swimming with prosthetic legs? She'd bought binoculars for whale watching before she'd learned it was the wrong season. It was not on the best island for it. But the binocs were in her backpack, so she pulled them out and turned to focus on the intersection behind her. There he was, making the turn onto Kuakini for the first loop. She'd interviewed a lawyer last year who was an avid triathlete and had even competed in the extreme iron competition. She'd learned a lot about the route, and he was following the route. He was making the turn north onto Kuakini for the first loop. The tan SUV pulled out and followed right behind him. He was making good time, almost as fast as the cars. How fast was he going? It took about 5 minutes for the cyclist to return and turn south. It should have taken much longer than that. A car turning at the intersection honked at another that pulled out in front of it. That triggered a memory. There had been some sort of car accident, and a picture of a man holding a car one-handed as he lowered it back to the ground. Glenn Shepard. What was he doing on Hawaii? And why was he running the extreme iron course? And I'm going to leave it at that, because if you want to learn exactly what he did and how he did it, you're going to have to read the book.
He's getting into trouble. Oh, I love it for me as a reader, but not so much for him. That's one of my favorite things about the character, though, is how he pushes himself. I mean, he has his low moments, but I like how you balance those low moments with that determination and with his mischief to a certain extent too. Because I think I'm only about, I want to say 15% of the way into the book, but I just recently passed the scene where he is using his, I want to say, exo frame to race.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and there's just him and a bunch of people in wheelchairs racing around and playing basketball,
including one of the doctors.
Yes, including one of the doctors. And it's just he's a great character.
And when you talk about great characters, and HP, I know you're an author too, and characters get away from us.
Oh yeah.
And I created a character explicitly for this scene where they're racing the wheelchair, and he's using his frame. It's supposed to be his complete body support because he can't walk. And that was one of the important things I wanted to show, is that it wasn't instantaneous. He wasn't just fitted with these things. Boom, he gets up and he runs 60 miles an hour and leaps tall buildings in a single bound. He had to learn to use it, and it was tough and it was rough. And so I created a character. I actually borrowed a friend for the character of Nick Pilaricetti, the psychiatrist who was assigned to the rehab hospital. And I had only intended Nick to be there for the one scene, because when the surgeon is dressing Glenn down for the wheelchair racing, here comes this guy around the corner, comes up, says, "What are you guys doing standing there? I'm going to lap you." And it's the psychiatrist who himself was injured and required either crutches or a wheelchair. And that gave me the opportunity to start looking inside the head. uh, because one of the things, because of the projects I worked on and the research, and the fact that actually part of my research takes me into the hospital room with some clinical patients, is you find a lot of personalities, and one of the ones that you see is a person who's going to make the best of their rehab has an irreverent sense
Mhm.
of, I am going to do this no matter what anybody tells me. So I wanted to capture that, but the person I used to design the character after is a psychiatrist who has worked with all sorts of disabilities and worked with kids a lot. And he'll do things like, I'll annoy you until you pay attention to me. And I'll get you to, you say you're going to give up. Well, I'm not going to leave this room until I make you laugh, and things of that sort. And much to my surprise, the character I was writing decided they didn't want to just be a bit part,
Of
and
course.
ended up being the major supporting actor in this entire role. Um, I've been asked if I were to cast this as a movie, who would I have in what role, and I'm really vague about all the different characters about who I would cast, but I know for certain that I would cast Kevin Hart as the as the
Yes.
as the psychiatrist. I think
I can
that's the type
absolutely
of
see
character.
that.
That's the type of character I want for that. And Dr. Nick became a major character and a major role throughout this as Glenn's confidant, and the one person who probably understands him better than anyone else.
He's definitely one of my favorite characters thus far. I think he's only appeared in maybe 2 or 3 scenes in what I've read at this
You will
point, but
see him much,
yes.
much more.
He's such a warm, encouraging presence
He
for
is.
Glenn going through this really hard time, and he's very much a tough love kind of character, but there's a lot of tough and a lot of love in how he treats his career, and he's a very important type of character in that kind of harsh setting. And that actually leads me into one of my next questions. One of my favorite things about the novel thus far is how very focused it is on not just the technological aspect of bionics, but the mental and physical therapy involved in getting Glenn accustomed to his modified body. It's very much not a Hollywood style "he's instantly
Yep.
powerful" story. And the thing this is though, therapy is generally it's less exciting than sci-fi. And
Yep.
and when it is exciting, it's only exciting for the person doing it, and even then it's more painful than exciting. And so I was curious, you depict Glenn's experience of physical therapy very well. It's very engaging and you feel a lot for him in those scenes. What decisions did you make as a writer to help you depict his therapy in an interesting way?
My publisher told me that it's obvious I loved my character and I needed to be mean to him.
Yes.
Uh,
Oh,
so the there were two or three major things that I wanted to do with this story that differed from Martin Caden's original. The first is that the bionic rebuild was done to Steve Austin involuntarily. He didn't want to have this done. So, one of the things that I do know from the prosthetic test that DARPA has run is that everybody involved is a volunteer. So, the first thing up is that everyone had to be a volunteer. Glenn had to be a volunteer. He had to want this to be done. The second thing I wasn't particularly keen on was the fact that in the uh, book in particular and in the TV series, he was a spy. He was a secret agent, and everything about him was secret. And if there's a person running around with these type of capabilities, there's nothing going to be secret. So I wanted to deal with the idea that there were those who wanted to keep it secret and those who wanted to, uh, to talk about it, to praise him, to say, hey, this is great. And of course, that also means there would be those who vilify and call him more machine than person. Um, and and then the third thing I wanted to do had to do with his capabilities. But aside from that, I wanted to make it real. And I've talked with people who've had this done. There is a phrase here, and I'm going to go and I'm just going to read a couple paragraphs. Um, Jennifer Butler asks him, okay, what hurts? Glenn and Nick exchanged a look, and Jen worried that she may have ventured into forbidden territory. Oh, should I not ask that question? No, it's okay, Glenn answered. He looked again at Nick, who nodded in return. Frankly, Miss Butler, everything hurts. Not surprising considering the workout you did today. No, not that. Everything hurts all the time. There are times I regret doing this, but it was my idea. I had to see it through. I'm so sorry. No, don't be sorry about it. I'm a volunteer. And frankly, knowing what I know now, I'd still do it. But every step, every revision surgery takes a toll. And how did you handle it? Honestly, not well. And that right there is how I decided what I wanted to do. But everything about the therapy, going through therapy, everything going through the recovery was colored by frustration. He wanted to have it done and get back to his life. Um, Things that didn't work. There were elements of his prosthetics that didn't work at first, and he was frustrated. And everybody would tell him it should work, it should work, it should work, and he'd say it doesn't work. Nothing I do works. You're not, you're not letting me do what I need to do. You haven't turned it up to full strength. You haven't turned it on to full power. And so, showing the frustration and then showing the people who wouldn't let him be frustrated at him. The psychiatrists, the physical therapists, the surgeons. I, uh, I borrowed characteristics from people I know. The calm, dispassionate. Uh, you know, I'm a surgeon. That's what I do. I do it well. I care for my patients, but I can't get involved because it would be too much. I mean, they're all different characteristics. So I built the story out of people I know. And I build the character out of the people I've interviewed and talked with in the course of the work and the studies that I've done.
Nice. Oh, I get my screen set up here. What's going on? There was a weird button I clicked. Okay, there we go. The screen is normal again. One particular question I wanted to ask about how you treat mental and physical trauma and whatnot. Glenn in the story has PTSD. I mean, he's been through some stuff. But by the time of the novel setting, as you've written it, it's known as post-trauma adaptation rather than PTSD. And I'm curious, why the decision to change the name for the future?
Well, part of it is because there's already a move in the psychological and psychiatric sciences to change the name from post traumatic stress disorder to post traumatic stress syndrome. And in reality, what we find is that there are, clinically, we find the adaptation problems are there whenever there is a trauma. Whether or not a person says, I'm stressed because of this trauma, the very fact that they've gone through a trauma means that there is stress and they are going to have to adapt to it. So I basically took what I have seen in my experience through the sciences, and including clinical sciences, and said, I bet that in a few years, they're going to be they've already worked to take the disorder out of it because it's stigmatizing, frankly. People who are dealing with this say it's not a disorder. I'm a normal human being, but I have this issue. And it's, also taking the idea of syndrome out of it and taking stress, the idea that it's not the stress, it's the trauma that caused this. And that was actually why I chose to change the name. It was a little forward thinking, maybe a little bit of prognostication that that's the direction that the field would take.
I have to say I like the name change because I've never struggled with PTSD myself, but I do have OCD and some anxiety that I've been in therapy because I basically had in one of my careers I put so much stress on myself and was in such a stressful situation that my brain basically rewired itself, and my
Right.
therapist said I had a trauma reaction to the stress. And one of the interesting things about facing my anxiety and my OCD is that, yeah, medication is a thing, but there is nothing quite so useful as simply learning how to adapt to the new way
Right.
your brain works. And it's like I was diagnosed with OCD, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago at this point, and I have been learning various coping techniques to help organize my brain. And learning those coping techniques, those adaptation techniques, have been amazing. I went from having written one book and then not releasing anything for 5 years to have I basically learned to organize my brain in such a way that I've released 6 books in the past 2 years, and it's a really incredible thing to know that about the human mind, and to know that something like that, like PTSD, like really powerful OCD, etc., is surmountable with adaptation techniques. And so I thought that was a cool name change for that reason in this setting.
It
Now,
also comes it also comes a little bit from some counseling that I went through, in which there was a near trauma, and it's really weird because the human brain does not have to be traumatized, does not have to be stressed. You can have something that you might have interpreted as a trauma if it had happened,
mhm.
and it was a near miss. And so again, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to take both stress and disorder out of it, and go after it, because one of the things you learn is you adapt.
Right. Let's see here. I lost track of my questions. I'm asking all my questions out of order. All right, now we're going to get more into the sci-fi aspect of it. So my next question is, around what year is this novel set, and how did you determine how far into the future to set it?
uh, that's that's actually a great question, because I decided that Glenn wanted to go to Mars. I had to give him a goal. What is it that he wants to do? Well, he's an astronaut and he's a doctor. So what would be the ultimate? Well, uh, in the near future, going back to moon, well, we probably do that in about, well, uh, I know that there are plans to do it by 2029 and get back to the moon, maybe even get to Mars. But plan when I first started writing this, it's been quite a few years now, and there were some projections that said go back to the moon by 2029, go to Mars by 2039. So I started with that as my object. The other part of it was, where are the bionics? What's the state of the art with bionics now? What would be in 20 years? And so the idea was to start the time frame at around 2039. Glenn's accident takes place in 2039 as they are training for a mission to Mars. It's not the first mission to Mars, but what it is it's the first mission that's going to actually build a permanent base. And from that point on, they would be changing places. Uh, no one would stay, but a new mission would come out just about the time the old mission left. And so I put this, and the entire action of the book spans about 3.5 to 5 years. So consider it to be starting around 2039 and ending around 2043, thereabouts. In fact, I put some dates in there. Each of the chapters is led off with a tweet equivalent that we're calling chirps, and there are dates put on those to track time. Again, that's something that my publisher said, why don't you put something up there, because you can tell another story with the tweets, the chirps. And that's
I
exactly
like the
what
little
happens.
trips.
And that's exactly what you'll discover as you read, is that there is another story being told through the chirps.
Yeah, I'm beginning to, at the point where I'm at, excuse me, my tongue got all tied. At the point where I am, I'm beginning to see some little bits of interesting hints show up, and so
Yeah.
I'm paying more attention to the church now. Um, how many of Glenn's modifications are possible, even if they're expensive, in the present day? Like how close are we?
Well,
He's gotten a lot of stuff done.
the ARM is a logical extension of what we already have. The current state of the art is an is a prosthetic arm that can bend at the elbow, the wrist, the fingers. It's got at least 17 different articulations that it can undergo. The idea of bringing it all the way up to the shoulder and mounting it is my invention for the story. The legs, the truth of the matter is that when it comes to prosthetic legs, we don't have to put a lot of electronics into them as it stands right now. The springs and levers and the pistons do very well, as witnessed by anybody who uses the running blades like the Paralympians do. Those are quite efficient, but the same technology that is put into an fully articulated arm could be put into fully articulated legs. So they're a little bit further fetched than what's currently available, but they're certainly possible. Now, the ability to have touch feedback is something that the researchers have been doing over the past 5 years or so, and it is possible. That's not what's commercially available. In fact, there is an artificial arm from the elbow up, or at least from the elbow all the way to the fingertips. And some that go from upper arm to the fingertips. They are available, commercially available, that a person can be fitted with, and they would be paid for by insurance and Medicare. And it's called the Luke arm, and it was made by a company called DECA. And those things are available. The ear prosthesis and the eye prosthesis are direct variations on uh, devices that have been the auditory prosthesis, the cochlear implant, has been around for going on almost 30 years now. And now the capabilities, I've extended them, made them a little more powerful, a little bit better processing, a little more compact, and built radio functions into Glenn's uh, ear. The retinal prosthesis is actually something that I saw almost 20 years ago as it was being researched and developed, in which the electrode was put on the retina of the eye. It presumed that the eye was intact and that the photoreceptors of the eye were functional. So that was something that is very, very real. Again, better precision, better capability, and the like. Also, the ability to record and transmit is something that I extended. But as we see, the computer electronics, what we have in our phone, what we have in our Bluetooth devices, those are all things that are really advancing so quickly that I didn't feel that there was too much of a problem. So the base function of all of the prosthetics is the sort of thing that we could do today. We're not going to talk about cost. That 1 billion might be right. I don't know, but the most of the functions are there now. The computer integrated all that is science fiction, and that's my right as a science fiction author to come up with something that doesn't really exist yet and push it forward.
Yeah, I actually have a question that I didn't talk about with you beforehand. How did you decide what parts of Glenn to injure? Did it mostly have to do with, oh, here's
Oh,
some.
it's the $6 million man. It's definitely the $6 million
Oh,
man.
okay.
Yeah, I did the one thing I did is that I added the ear, which is the feature of the bionic woman, and not the $6 million man. Uh, but I did, but I chose them because I knew that that's where the prosthetic field was going, the bionic field was going.
I figured it was something related to the technology available. What would you say was the most challenging part of the novel to write?
The romance.
Always, it's always the romance that's tough to write.
And the funny part of it is that I wrote a short story uh, with Casey Azell, and I swear uh, if people were to try to predict which part of the story I wrote and which part of the story she wrote, they'd be wrong. And the reason is because we both wrote all of it, and I wrote several quite romantic scenes in it, and but I had trouble doing it. I was actually sending versions to my alpha readers on a regular basis, saying, "Does this work? Does this work? Does this work?" And and of course, once again, my publisher, when she sat down with me, and we spent almost 5 hours going over the manuscript page by page. She says, "It's too easy. It's got to be harder." So I had to go back and really work on this a lot. Um, it was it was hard. The other aspect that was really, really hard is I had to come up with a medical mystery worthy of the book, worthy of the setting. And that took me a while. And I have been asked by at least one person, did you write this entire book just to do the punchline of what the medical mystery is? And I go, maybe. Uh, it was, I had the idea for the book before I came up with the medical mystery, but I I had to do a lot of research, and I do know how to read scientific papers, and I read clinical papers, and I read laboratory research papers, and so I did a lot of digging to come up with something that I thought would make a really good mystery for this.
Cool. How much additional research did you have to do beyond what you already know from your just standard career?
Uh, I did a lot of additional research. I had to research materials.
Mm.
Okay, what material are we building all of this from? What are we going to do for a power supply? I hand wove the power supply problem, um, and I fully admit that one. We really don't talk about the power supply. Uh, the I had I
Secrets of
have
sci-fi.
spreadsheets upon spreadsheets upon spreadsheets trying to figure out acceleration and g forces
Mm.
that and every time I thought I had it figured out, I was wrong. And I had to go back to online calculators and ask people the questions and do all of this. I used a lot of NIH library type resources that exist for uh, looking up syndromes and looking up, what happens if you get this contaminant and what happens if you get that contaminant.
Mhm.
Uh, had to do a fair amount of research on the physical fitness
Ah,
capability because the human body is not going to be able to tolerate one part of it uh, running at 60 miles an hour. So I had to spend a fair amount of time looking into what all of the elite athlete capabilities were, so that I could
ooh.
figure. And my threshold was to go at about between 15 and 25% better
Mhm.
was the goal, um, which also involved talking to a lawyer who had actually run the Ironman course,
Ah.
and then find out. And also, there was some on the site research. I've had at least one person tell me that he went to Hawaii and he was going to retrace the steps to find out if I got them right. In which I told him, I said, good luck finding an error, because I know where every one of those places is. Uh, and When I do go back, I'm going to have to take a copy of the book and take it to the one of the net restaurants named by name. I'm going to have to say, hey, by the way, I wrote about your restaurant in
Oh,
this.
cool. Yes, do that.
Uh, but uh, so there was a lot of research, and thank goodness for the internet because and also Google satellite images,
Oh, yeah.
really really important because I had been places and I knew what they looked like, but I wanted a description like what's the building look like?
Hmm.
Where's the parking lot and stuff like that. And so, Google Maps and satellite imagery helps a lot.
We got a comment from Evil Penguin that says spreadsheets upon spreadsheets upon spreadsheets sounds familiar.
Yeah, well, he's a spreadsheet master.
All right. We've got, let's see here. I've got two more questions.
All right.
Well, we'll do the simplest one first. What's the significance of the title, or is that a secret?
No, it's not a secret at all. 1973, as I said, March 7th, 1973, an ABC TV movie called The $6 Million Man aired. It was a 2-hour TV movie. And there were two more movies that were aired before the series started in 1974. But the first movie was considered to be the pilot, and it starts with the astronaut Steve Austin testing a spacecraft and crashing in the desert. And when that episode was taken and broken into two parts for the TV series, they named the episode The Moon and the Desert, part one and part two. And uh, in the story, in the book, in the Cyborg book by Martin Caidin, the story ends with Steve Austin walking out of the desert, having been sent on one of these secret agent missions. But in the TV show, it was mostly supposed to refer to the fact that Steve Austin was a moon astronaut, even at a time when we had just landed on the moon, and that he crashed in the desert. Well, in the case of this book, though, when I was groping for what am I going to title it, um, the action starts on the moon, and Glenn's goal is to go to Mars. So he wants to go to the Red Desert. And so I thought The Moon in the Desert made for a really, really, really cool title that is in and of itself an homage to that very first movie and TV show.
That's really cool. I like how everything sort of comes together nicely in the title itself. All right, final question. Um, there is a lot of detailed science in this novel, but it doesn't feel overwhelming at all. Like, I have zero science background, but I find myself able to follow it really easily. And so I'm curious to know what techniques you use to balance storytelling with science fiction to keep the novel approachable to readers.
Well, part of it starts from the fact that I've been a science advisor to a number of authors for quite some time now. I think I started around about 2006 or 2007. I started talking to certain authors. And one of the things I would do is they would say, well, how do you do such and such? And I would come up with an explanation. And then I would hear back from them and they'd say, well, here, how does this sound? And they would have something for the that their character said or a scene. And I go, well, that's not really how it goes. And go, yeah, but the guys who saying it are grunts. They're not scientists. And so I also attribute a lot of this to having taught a 4-year-old's Sunday school. And so when you have to explain things, stories of any sort to 4-year-olds, you learn to figure out how to do an analogy. And so uh, we work with stories. And if you want to talk about how the brain works, lots of people use computer analogies and electronics. Um, and the funny part is that sometimes plumbing and hydrology and how water and fluids work sometimes works better. I've been known to say that your brain is not a computer, it's steampunk, because it's all about steam and water pressure and lightning and valves and clockwork and the like. But really, how I manage to do that and balance the storytelling, it's actually something I do professionally. I teach a course called Communicating Science, in which we're trying to help the young graduate students in the sciences learn how to explain their science. How do you explain it to grandma when you're sitting around the table at Thanksgiving? How do you explain what you do? How do you go into a classroom full of fifth graders and explain something about how the brain sends signals down to the muscles to make the fingers waggle and all of this kind of stuff? Uh, these are areas that are really important, because I think if anything really truly comes out of the past few years, science gets explained badly. And when it's explained badly, people don't understand it. And frankly, um, we've got a lot of people trying to use science for policy and other purposes that don't understand it. And therefore, because they don't understand it, they don't explain it well, they don't apply it well, they don't use it well. And it is so, so, so important for scientists to cut out the middle person and communicate their science directly to the public. So in the course of writing this, I decided what I really wanted to do was apply everything that I teach and everything I talk about, and be able to explain the science to in a way that people might understand it, and certainly, hopefully, that they can enjoy it without having to necessarily have a PhD in it.
Well, I'm certainly enjoying it, and I definitely don't have a PhD in it. So you have
I know
succeeded.
there we have one person on our comments that has a PhD on it, and he hopefully enjoys it.
Well, we have reached the end of my questions, and so this has been a great interview. So thank you for coming on.
I'll
And
be happy
so
to.
before we go, I'll have you tell again who you are and where people can find your stuff, websites, all that fun stuff.
All
And
right.
then I suppose we will close out. But everybody go buy the book and leave a review, because I mean I'm only 15% in, but it's amazing thus far. So
Yes, reviews are very, 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 very important. Um, the reviews are partly what bookstores use to decide whether they're going to put it on the shelf.
yes.
And we're going to be doing some action in about a month, trying to get an order day where we get people to actually call their local bookstores and order and have delivered to the bookstore. So it's hopefully the stores will get the message, hey, you need to put this on the bookshelf.
Mm-hmm.
um, so Robert Hampson, Robert E. Hampson. Frankly, if you Google Robert Hampson, you get a tenor, a baritone. Uh,
The
um,
E is important.
the E is very important, because if you Google Robert E. Hampson, you get me. Uh, my website is rehampson.com. And unfortunately, that's a http://rehampson.com. If you, for whatever reason that I'm not going to go into, my website doesn't handle the HTTPS. So you got to make sure that's not in there. Um, but the at the website, you actually learn all about my science and my science fiction. I have a lot of science interviews, and that's also part of your question. I have been interviewed a lot on the science I've done. It's gotten quite a bit of attention, and again, the whole point is I have to make it understandable to anybody that may be listening.
Mhm.
So I've got a lot of links there. I've also got all of my books links to Amazon for most of my books, but for my Baen books, I have links to Amazon, to Barnes and Noble, and to Baen. And I also know that Books a Million and Half Price Books are also carrying the book as well. You can order it online. You can get an ebook. You can get an ebook for just about any format you want at Baen.com.
Mhm.
And
That's where I
you
just got
can,
mine.
yep. And you can also order it to be delivered to your house or ordered to be delivered to a store nearby you, which I highly encourage people who want a hard copy that can't get to me. Order and have it delivered to a store, because then it catches the attention of the buyers at that store.
That's actually a brilliant idea. I'm going to do that from now on.
Yeah, we're going to run a promotion in about a month with and try to snag some new readers and new viewers and come in. Also, I will be at the Fantasy Convention in Raleigh next weekend.
Nice. I'll
I
be
will
there too.
be I will be yeah, and I'm definitely looking forward to some of your panels, by the way.
So.
Because, by the way, and I'm going to say this. I'm going to say this in on your own, podcast. I am a fan of your writing. So
Oh, thank you.
and so I am a big fan, and I will be at LibertyCon in Chattanooga in June. I will be at Congregate in Winston-Salem, North Carolina in July, and at DragonCon in Atlanta Labor Day weekend. And for people who are listening who may be within reach of Las Vegas, Nevada, I will be at the 20 Books conference in Las Vegas in November, first week of November. And they do have a day in which there is come on in and meet the authors, get, buy books, get, signature autographs and all that kind of stuff.
That's cool. I want to make it out to 20 books one day. That's one of my dreams. I just hate traveling.
One of the things I get to do this year is actually give a talk on how to incorporate brain science in your stories.
Oh, cool. That's going to be a fun year. All right. Well, thank you again for coming on the show. And thank you, viewers, for tuning in and adding all your comments and questions and things. So, again, go buy the book, and we'll see you guys later.
Bye.